Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. This is going to be the third video in an ongoing series I've been doing this summer where I go over my personal top 10 champs in every specific class in Marvel Contest of Champions. I've really appreciated the feedback that I've gotten so far on these videos so far, and I always say this caveat at the beginning, this is an imperfect format to do this. The game is extremely complicated. There's over 250 champs coming out in the game now. It's just, there's so many good champs. I started off with only doing a top 5, and then I looked at how uninclusive that was, so I made it a top 10, and then even then there were so many champs that I felt like could be on the list as honorable mentions. I had to draw the line somewhere. I had to come up with a cohesive and entertaining list of a variety of champs that have just different utility and make sense on a top 10 together. So there is a little bit of overlap, but I do try to hit all the different pieces of utility that you want from each class within this top 10, and that's some of the reason why some champs may be left off. So please do leave comments and what you think about this, because I do really value everyone's opinion. But with that, we're going to get into number 3 today, which is the Mutant class. Now, Mutant class is in a weird spot. There has not been a new Mutant for a very long time, because for a long time they were sort of considered to be by far the most overpowered class. But man, things have changed. Certainly a lot of mutants exist as targets for Nimrod on defense. So people are a little more reluctant to put them in their battlegrounds decks and things like that. And also just the game is changing. There's things like class relationships that are more important now. So a lot of these mutants were just generically overpowered champions for the longest time. Now that we're a little bit more interested in stuff like the class wheel, the mutant class has sort of had a little bit of a renaissance. And we'll talk about that when we get into some of the more recent champions. But either way, it was pretty difficult to line this one up. So do take it with a grain of salt. But as with all of these, I've really thought about it a lot, and I've tried to put together a cohesive list for you that I hope you enjoy. So with that, we're going to get started with number 10. And my number 10 mutant is going to be a surprise, I think, but I had to include Sunspot on this list. Now, this was at the exclusion of some other champions. So as this is going on, you may be upset that how come you included Sunspot and not X champion or Y champion? Well, here's the thing, man. Now that I had the 7-star Sunspot, I was reminded of a very simple thing, that sometimes in this game, simplicity is beautiful. And Sunspot is, if anything, a simple champion. It's amazing the amount of damage. 1 special 1, 1 special 2. Now, if it's a longer fight, you do 2 special 1s and 1 special 2. If it's a really long fight, you do 3 special 1s and 1 special 2. If you want to do some crazy things for YouTube, you can weave a special 3 in there. But on top of that, it's a lot of damage. It's not just the special 2. It's when he has those flare states, he's just hitting harder. Look at his abilities. He just hits harder. The incinerates, they come out of nowhere to help with despair. You can throw a special 2 against Nick Fury, and then all of those incinerates will hit during the second life. It'll knock him back, and the despair will continue to prevent his healing so that he doesn't get all the way back up to 100. It's little things like that these simple champions are able to counter pretty nasty meta defenders Nick Fury or things like that. And he's got the perfect block. That's it. He's got big specials, he's got incinerate debuffs, and he's got a perfect block that you can trigger at the right time, and then the entire rest of the special, it works most of the time. Sometimes it's a little bugged, but for the most part, the rest of the special is going to register as zeros. It makes him very tanky. The only thing that can go wrong with him is if they're incinerate immune, or if you do not manage your little flares. That's not the right name for them. Your solar charges, and you lose your incinerates. If you lose your solar charges, it's kind of on you, but then he becomes completely neutered, and it's not fun at all. That said, like I said, simplicity is beautiful. The fact that he exists as a 7-star now, and we can kind of compare him to champs of the same power level, he is still that good, and he's going to just squeak into my top 10, again, at the expense of a couple other mutants, but I do feel strongly enough about this to include him as my number 10. So next up we have number 9, and I'm giving this slot to Havoc. Havoc is tried and true because he's very unlike the other mutants, right? He has energy resistance. The way he does his damage is fascinating. Like, he's got that feedback debuff, but he also has massive special 2 and special 3. And then, it's just stuff like he can take hazard shift because of that energy resistance, and like the shocks are just going to not only ramp him, but he's not going to take that much damage off of it. And he has the non-contact hits, which is really good for stuff like thorns and your Korgs that are kicking about and things like that. So I do really enjoy playing him and think he's quite good. He synergizes well with the Inequity Mastery as well. And again, there are just times where he's going to be the right choice. He is one of the earliest mutants to kind of punish shrugging, right? That is sort of a more modern mutant characteristic, but if his plasma debuffs are getting shrugged by skill champions, then it is bursting them with damage as well. There's just a lot of ways to play him that are interesting. I really like the energy resistance and the way that he can sort of change the way he does damage, whether it's that feedback debuff or the big specials. He's fairly simple to play. Normally you want to just do a special 1 and then build to the special 3 with heavies, or you can just go straight to the special 3, or if time's a factor, you can actually use the special 2. It does a ton of damage as well. As long as you keep that feedback on them, you're going to be ticking away the entire time. He's quite good. Like, throw him against a Doctor Doom, all those energy hits and things like that are not going to be doing as much damage. There's not much else to say about him. I think his kit is self-explanatory, but he does, again, kind of squeak his way into the top 10. He is a little bit of an older champion, but I think he still has his uses today. A lot of people rank him for defense on Battlegrounds, but he does have the offensive use as well, and I think he's quite good. Now, coming in at number 8, we have White Magneto. Originally, I had Red and White Magneto together because I wanted to put more champs on this list, but they really are different. I mean, the thing with White Magneto is he still has the massive attack and the ability reduction. The thing that makes him a little bit different and slightly more versatile at times than Red Magneto is the full bleed immunity. Sometimes that comes in handy if there's like enhanced bleed or some other effect like that. There's just not going to be any debuffs or passive effects that are related to bleed on him, which is quite nice. Additionally, you don't need to kind of do like the parry heavy style here. He gets his prowess just like partially from knocking them down, but also just from hitting the opponent. And the special 1 is fairly useful. Like you generally want to do like special 1 into special 2, get the armor break, and then get multiple degens. That works really well, but his special 2 hits so hard that it's really easy to use power back boost with him and make him very safe. He doesn't have all the tricks of the trade and that immense special 3 that Magneto Red does, but there are times that you do want to use his pre-fight, which is a little bit more of a counter, once again, to skill champions, whereas Magneto doesn't really counter skill champions. He counters just metal champions. He has that unstoppable, of course. We'll get to that when it comes to Red Magneto. So I guess White Magneto is also a little bit easier to fight, even if you have metal champions. But yeah, I do really enjoy White Magneto. He's a great team building component. He's got not only good synergies, but he boosts up stuff like ability accuracy and attack on your team. And then he uses the guidance pre-fight. If you can also take a couple fights with him and get more guidance pre-fights, that'll just help you in the quest or in war as well. And often if Red Magneto works, he'll work too. It's just like you won't parry heavy special 3. You'll actually have to engage with the opponent a little bit and fight them. I do think because of that, though, he is quite good and deserves to make the top 10, and he is my number 8. Okay, next up is number 7, and I'm giving this slot to Toad. When it comes to punishing skill champions, again, I don't want to overemphasize the class wheel, but he came out last year, and it became very clear that mutants were going in a different direction. He has a ton of prowess, which is great. That's really good for mutants. But, when skill champions are shrugging, it's not only ramping him, it's turning into passive poisons. And this, of course, works amazingly against Nick Fury, where if you have enough active poisons on the activation of the second life, they convert to the passive poisons, which then will blunt the healing of the LMD, and he'll basically just kill himself. It's a wonderful, wonderful interaction. But yeah, Toad, I really enjoy the simplicity on this guy. It's essentially just spam the special 1. Like, That's literally all you have to do to play him. Occasionally the stuns will line up off of his SIG ability, making those even longer and more strong, and then you can use the special 2 to kind of cash out and get a massive prowess special. It does consume your prowess though, so most of the time you bring him in against a skill champion that's going to be shrugging a little bit. It's just going to build yourself up. You spam special 1s, you have really good regen, and you're immune to poison yourself. That is a really, really solid kit. You don't really need to think too hard when you're playing him. However, if you do line up a big special 2 during the stun, it's very nice. But yeah, just countering stuff like Nick Fury, shrugging in general, having prowess, big specials, having an immunity and regen, making him very tanky. I do rate this guy pretty high, and that's why he made it all the way to my number 7. So now for my number 6, I'm kind of surprising to me as well, but when I was making the list, I felt pretty good about this. I'm putting Red Magneto at my number 6. And now listen, when it's a bunch of metal champions in a row, he's not only the best mutant in the game, he's the best champ in the game because he turns off everything about them, not just the auto block and the abilities and stuff, but like, you know, big ability reduction, big attack increase, and then like the shrapnel bleed. If the special 3 itself doesn't kill them, that will. It's just a parry heavy play style. You can use the unstoppable to charge your heavy as well. So like, yeah, we all know what Magneto does, and we all know that he's completely overpowered. We're using him a lot against Baron Zemo with this really bad Alliance War tactic and some of these node combinations currently, and he is one of the best counters when it comes to that. But like, I think the game has gotten more complicated, that like we're not reaching for that Magneto for the first call, unless if it's like a really dangerous situation and we want to bring him in for a specific couple fights. And what I mean by that is like, you know, so like let's say there's like a gladiator Hulk somewhere, like, okay, he's metal, great. But it's like, yeah, Valkyrie exists, Shang-Chi exists, like they're slow, there's ways to deal with unstoppable, there's ways to counter him. Not that he's like the worst defender in the world, but I was just using an example of a metal champion. It's like we don't need him as much because there are more niche RPG counters that are somewhat more interesting than him as well. So I do kind of factor that in here. Like, yes, he is a bit of a cheat code if they're metal, but also the game is developed to a place where it's like, you don't have to reach with him out of necessity. You can just do it to kind of be a little bit more like not have to think about the fight as much. But I think because of that, that hurts him a little bit. It makes him a little bit less interesting and a little bit less necessary to rank up on your account. So if I'm doing a top 10 mutant list, I'm really looking at the abilities that the mutants have to counter things that you want mutants to counter. And while yes, he will counter metal champs of any class, and he does have the big special attacks that you expect mutants to have, he's a little lackluster to me in the whole grand scheme of the game, and I'm not going to him as my top choice even against metal champions, unless if I feel like I absolutely need to, and then you take him off the bench, you dust him off, you use him, and then you put him back. So that's why he's so low. I don't know if that makes sense to you, and you could certainly argue that he would be higher because what he does is extremely powerful and important. Like for war, you definitely need some for attack. For questing though, do you really need him? I mean, maybe there's a boss every once in a while, but I'm having a lot more fun in the game using other champions. And to me, that's a sign that he is becoming a little bit less relevant in today's game. I hope again that makes sense, and don't treat this as like, Campo, you're dumb that you don't think Magneto's higher. I'm just looking at all the facts here and how everything comes together, and that's why I'm putting him all the way down at number 6. You could definitely make the argument though, case by case basis, he's number 1 in some cases, right? He's sort of in his own little cutout piece of the game fabric right now, but on my list, I'm putting him at number 6. All right, so now we've come to number 5. And again, this is going to look a little different than what a lot of people say, but I'm looking at the whole picture. My number 5 is actually Bishop. Bishop, and some of it has to do with his defensive use. And I know that this is mostly an offensive list, but there's something really cool about Bishop. It's something I've talked to B McG about, and like this is his idea, but it's something that I resonate with and I've also shared with other people. But he cannot be countered well by Nimrod, which means ranking him for Battlegrounds is a really good idea because he doesn't just get shut down by the mutant killer, and also the amount of things that he can do on offense are pretty astonishing. And it really has to do, again, with that class wheel. His ability when facing skill champions to not have the shrug of the stun, and the ability to punish when stuff like the incinerates are getting shrugged. It's very, very powerful. He has really good resistance to energy as well. And, just kind of a pretty easy to play style. Big special 2s, the incinerate debuffs. He can even do a big special 3. And then in questing, he really gets some good abilities. Like if you end with 2 bars of power, the next time you start a fight with that 2 bars of power, plus the ability that you get from his SIG in terms of increasing the damage of the incinerate, for example, is quite good. It is quite good. So I do think he's a bit of an underrated attacker and a really good defender. And it's sort of like with him, I look at sort of the whole package. Like he has a lot of survivability. He has a lot of ways of countering skill champions. He has really big special attacks. And, he makes people think when you place him on defense in a way that other mutants may not. And like, again, even though this is mostly an offensive tier list, I did kind of factor that in terms of like his versatility and like usefulness when you do rank him up. I think that's important to note. And that's why I have him in the top 5. So now next, I'm going to do a little aside and I'm going to just make a guess. I'm not including Dani Moonstar in this rating because she literally just came out. I've played her a little bit on the CCP by the time this video comes out, and it's just sort of like, I think she's going to be this good, but we haven't really seen her released and see how playable she is and like if some of her trade-offs are real or not. But with that said, I have a feeling that she may eke into the top 5. I have her currently as like a maybe as my number 4, but I am not going to include her on this list. I'm just saying that like kind of looking into the future, you might consider her to be that high. We'll have to see. The next time I do this, we'll actually place her. But my guess is she's going to be kind of right around that Bishop area, maybe Toad area as well, in terms of what she can do. And it is very exciting to finally have a mutant in here, who I think is going to be a very, very good champ for the future of the mutant class as well. Now let's get back to the real tier list. My number 4, I'm giving this one to Archangel, because Archangel is just a force to be reckoned with, and I think more so than Magneto even. Magneto counters the metal champions in a way where like he gets most of the abilities shut down and he can parry heavy and finish the fight with a special 3. Well, Archangel, if they're bleed and poison immune, is not part of it. If they're not immune to bleed and poison, his parry heavy doesn't just turn off like part of the ability accuracy, it turns off all of it, and the damage over time is insane. And he also has an anti-shrugging ability. He was one of the first mutants to counter that aspect of skill. It's why if you get lucky enough to land a couple of bleeds against Kingpin, you will not shrug for the rest of the time. He also can't be ability reduced, so it makes fighting some fights and some scenarios a little bit easier. Now, his ability is really old and it's not as broad as like a Mysterio when it comes to the ability reduction, and I don't fully know the limits of it, but I do know that generally against like Domino, he's a pretty decent counter. He will still crit fail when bleeds don't proc and things like that. But overall, you can rely on your parries landing for the most part. And also she won't be shrugging your bleeds once a few of them stick. So yeah, Archangel, very self-explanatory. I do rate him higher than like the Magneto types, because he's just like, if he works and everything lines up and you get really good RNG, he's just erasing opponents so easily. Very self-explanatory. And you're probably wondering, well, wait, who are the top 3 if Archangel is here? But again, we've got some quite powerful mutants in the top 3. So moving on from Archangel, our number 4, we're going to number 3. Now for me, it was really tricky to rate these top 3. And for me, I'm putting at number 3 Kitty Pryde. Now, again, Magneto, Archangel, Kitty Pryde, these champions are off the charts in terms of certain scenarios being the most powerful. I have just seen enough data to know that Kitty Pryde is far from invincible. Now, if you are the perfect Kitty Pryde player, she's one of the top 2 best champions in the entire game and definitely the best in the mutant class. If she has the Tiger synergy, you could argue she goes up. And I am considering that a little bit for her. But the thing is, she doesn't have much safety net for when it goes south. And like, she does have a lot of safety nets, right? Like, the phasing itself is amazing. If they are a miscounter, she doesn't take any damage, and her sig ability pushes her to a special 3 usually. Then you can throw the special 3 and get an even longer phase. Like, believe me, she has the safety nets, but she doesn't have the safety nets for the safety nets, because if one thing goes wrong, she is dead. So I do think that matters. Because like, she does bypass a ton of stuff, and like, sometimes she can make your lives easier by taking a bunch of fights that she has no business taking. She was really good for a lot of those Eternity of Pain fights. You could cheese the Nick Fury, for example, and things like that. Debuffs on her, who cares? She won't take any damage. She'll just heal off of them, things like that. She is immensely powerful. She is extremely fun to play, but the reality of her, man, I cannot put her as top 1 in Mutant because of that lack of the safety net for the safety nets. That's what I'm going to keep saying about her. So she is my number 3. You can fight me on that if you want. In the right hand, she's always going to be number 1. But again, for me, am I always not dying with her? No, I am dying with Kitty Pryde every once in a while. I do get scared of using her every once in a while too. So she's coming in squarely at number 3 with a very, very high upside, though, of course. We all know that. Now, number 2 for me, man, is Omega Red. And listen, I know there's some people that are like huge on Omega Red, and some people are against him. I typically have not been the biggest fan of Omega Red for myself. But dude, I've seen some things with this guy and have to put him at number 2. For the longest time, I would even consider him maybe the best mutant. Now, obviously the way to play him is with the recoil tree and just stay close to the opponent, get really good at those short parries, and just barely do any damage. Barely do any hits, and just do a ton of damage, weave in your heavies. The most skilled Omega Red players are taking such a range of fights that are absolutely crazy. Now, he does have some skill countering abilities. He does have like the Thorns counter off of his medium and his heavy, and basically most of the hits of his special attacks. He does have anti-shrug. Like, once he gets to 10 spores, nothing is shrugging. So goodbye Conflictor, goodbye Masochism, goodbye Korg, goodbye, all those champions that shrug stuff. That's huge. You can also Quake style with him. You could just sit in the corner and land a heavy every once in a while and just let them die. He's immensely powerful, and he is scary powerful in the right hands. He does kind of require recoil, but you could argue in questing he doesn't. In questing, when it's a longer fight, if you can just sort of maintain 10 spores and then get to the special 2 and open your field that way, he's doing fine. And then like obviously against like Biohazard or Caltrops or something like that, he's totally cracked. But yeah, like it depends on what you want to look at. Like, he's got the utility that he needs, and then he's a complete nuke. But the spore damage doesn't even really scale with recoil itself. The reason you run recoil is because of the double edge, pretty much. And having that double edge at the beginning starts you in your death field or whatever it's called. So, that's the main reason for running it. That's why I'm saying you don't necessarily need to run it. A lot of people put him in their decks for battlegrounds, even though they don't run recoil. So yeah, Omega Red is still so powerful. He does require the high sig. He does require a lot of skill, especially with the short range parries. But yeah, I have no doubt that he's number 2. And for me, number 1 is Apocalypse. And again, I know people are going to fight me on that, but you got to look at the whole picture of him. And like, I looked at Grandmaster's Gauntlet, which was Kabam saying, here's a bunch of medium range challenges for you. They're very difficult fights. They have 800k health. Like, you are using mostly rank 3s and rank 4s. And who solved the most problems on that fight? It was Apocalypse. He solved the disorient. He solved bleed. He solved healing. He used his concussion. He used his special damage. He was able to regen at the start of every fight. If he was SIG 200, he was getting that health back so that you were saving potions. And he was able to make people horsemen. I think he's self-explanatory. A lot of people know how powerful he is. And a lot of people don't think he's as powerful because he's not the fastest Battlegrounds champion. He does take a couple fights to get going, but when you look at the amount of utility he has, plus he just, in most scenarios, purification of debuffs just doesn't happen. That means, again, Conflictor, Masochism right out of the gate are just turned off. Unless if there's some kind of ability accuracy, Cleanse will stop him. Cleanse will definitely stop him. That can be a little annoying. But man, and then on top of all that utility and damage that he has, he also can basically become like Mutant Corvus. Like his power back boost potential when he's running the recoil tree, when he has 4 genetic code and he's throwing those special 2s, it's crazy. It is crazy. So his range, if you want to push him, is quite high, but that's far from the only way to play him. That disorient immunity comes in handy so much. There's nobody else that's immune to disorient. You know, Danny Moonstar is going to be the next champion that has some way to counter disorient finally. But for APOC, man, he just becomes immune to it. That comes in handy in so many places on so many maps everywhere. And yeah, he's still the best mutant. He's designed to be on teams of mutants. He's designed to enhance the other mutants on the team. You can use the Horseman. You cannot use the Horseman. Often it's better to not because he's so good unto himself. And like I said, I always go back to that gauntlet, which is like a smorgasbord of various scenarios in Marvel Contest of Champions where you need to counter a bunch of stuff. And who was always the GOAT at that? It was always APOC. Even years later, I still was using APOC on my team. I used APOC in the very first gauntlet when it came out like 2 years ago, and I'm still using him today. And he's still arguably the safest option for so many of those crazy fights, for that crazy Korg, for that Sasquatch, for even the MODOK, for the Spider-Ham on that gauntlet map. I didn't even talk about the evade countering ability yet, like against that Spider-Ham. That really comes into play as well. Plus, he just has a ton of health. He's really hard to kill. So yeah, that's why, like, looking at the whole picture, I still got to give it to Big Daddy APOC. I think he's the best mutant for sure, in my opinion. And like, we're never going to see him as a 7-star, that's for sure. So I'm really happy I've got one at rank 4, maybe eventually rank 5, because APOC is just so freaking good. So anyway, those are my top 10 mutants. This one was a little tricky to thread the needle and get everybody in the right place, but I do feel pretty confident by it. As I always say, please do like and subscribe, but also do leave comments on this video. I'd love to hear what you think. Don't be like, Campo, you're stupid because you didn't involve this one champion or whatever, but I do really want to go back and forth. Let me know the champions I missed. Let me know if I completely misranked somebody based on your opinion. And we still got 3 more of these to go. There's still 3 more classes. So I hope you've enjoyed this one. We did Mutant today, top 10. Had a lot of fun with it. Take care. Have a great day, and I'll catch you in the next one.